My grandmother set down her fork at her own 75th birthday dinner, looked at me across the white tablecloth and said, "I just hope that $3,000 I've sent you every month these past 4 years has made things a little easier, sweetheart." I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain did the thing it always does in a crisis, the thing 4 years of emergency room shifts had drilled into me. It went quiet and started counting. 3,000 a month. 12 months a year. 4 years. $144,000. $144,000 I had never seen. I looked down the table at my father. His face had gone the color of the tablecloth. My stepmother set her wine glass down very carefully, like it might detonate, and stared at a spot just past my left ear. And my half-sister kept scrolling her phone, because she hadn't been listening, because she never listened, because the only person at that table she had ever truly looked at was herself. I turned back to my grandmother. She was waiting, smiling, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair, genuinely happy, genuinely expecting me to say thank you. "Grandma," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I've never gotten a single dollar. I'm going to tell you everything that happened that night. I'm going to tell you what my stepmother said when she finally stopped pretending, and I promise you it's worse than you're imagining. But before I do, wherever you are right now, in your car, on your lunch break, lying in bed at 2 in the morning, the way I do, drop a comment and tell me what city you're in. I want to know how far this travels. Because the night I'm about to describe was watched live by 40,000 strangers, and I'm not done letting people see." Okay, let me back up. My name is Della. I'm 28, and I'm an ER nurse at a level 1 trauma center in Columbus, Ohio. I tell people what I do, and they imagine adrenaline, drama, lives saved before the commercial break. It's not like that. Mostly the job is reading people who can't or won't tell you what's wrong with them. A man walks in, clutching his arm and swearing he's fine, and you watch his lips and his fingernails and the way his breath catches, and you know, before the monitor confirms it, that his heart is dying in his chest. You learn to see the thing underneath the thing. You learn that people lie about their pain almost as often as they lie about everything else, and that the lie is usually the most important symptom. I was sitting at that dinner reading my family the way I read a patient, and what I saw was a family that was crashing. They just didn't know it yet. Here's what you need to understand about us before the night went the way it went. My mother, her name was Diane. She was my grandmother's only daughter. Died when I was 19. Breast cancer. Fast and merciless. 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral. After she was gone, my grandmother Gloria did what grandmothers do. She set up a trust. The way she explained it to me later, she put money aside every month for my nursing school, my loans, my rent, my life, and because I was 19 and a wreck and about to leave the state for school, and because she was spending most of that year in Arizona caring for my grandfather as he slid into dementia, she named the obvious person as the custodian of that account. My father. I want you to sit with that for a second because half the comments on the original live stream were people asking, why didn't she just send the money straight to you? And it's a fair question. The answer is that she did try in the only way a grieving woman 1,000 miles away could. She trusted the man her daughter had married. She set up automatic transfers into a trust account with my father as trustee on the explicit written condition that the funds were for me, and then she got on a plane to go take care of her dying husband. And she didn't look at a bank statement for 4 years because she was busy keeping the love of her life long enough to say goodbye. My grandfather passed last spring, and it was only this past Thanksgiving when I let slip that I was $110,000 deep in student loans and crying in the bathroom about it that something cold went across my grandmother's face. She didn't say anything that night. She is not a woman who says things before she's ready. But back to the dinner. We were at a steakhouse downtown, the kind with leather booths and a wine list thick as a phone book, and my father had insisted on the private room because Mom only turns 75 once. He was paying for all of it, which struck me as generous at the time. I know now whose money was paying for it. My stepmother, I'll just call her my stepmother because she earned that distance and nothing warmer, was wearing a watch I recognized. I recognized it because 8 months earlier, I'd stood in front of a jewelry store window downtown on my lunch break, in my scrubs, eating a granola bar that was technically my dinner, and I'd looked at that exact watch. A Rolex, Datest, mother of pearl face. $11,000. I remember the number because I remember thinking that $11,000 was almost exactly what I owed in past due medical bills from the week my kidneys nearly quit. I have lupus. I've had it since I was 22. Most days it's a low hum I can live around. But it likes to flare, and when it flares it goes after my kidneys, and the medication that keeps it from doing that costs more than my rent. 2 years ago, I rationed it. I cut the doses, stretched the prescription, told myself I'd refill when the next paycheck cleared. I ended up in the very ER I worked in, on the other side of the bed for once, swollen and gray and so far into a flare that the attending, a man I'd handed instruments to 100 times, put his hand on my shoulder and asked, very gently, why I hadn't come in sooner. I'd called my father from the hospital bed. I'd asked him for $400 to cover the copay so I could afford the infusion and not do this again. He told me money was tight. He told me to learn to budget. That same week, my stepmother posted a photo of a kitchen renovation. Quartz countertops, a range that cost more than my car. So when I sat at that birthday dinner and watched her tilt her wrist to catch the candlelight in $11,000 of Swiss steel, while my grandmother beamed and asked if her gift had made my life easier, I felt something in me go very still and very cold. Not the hot kind of anger that flips tables. The other kind, the kind that does math. You never got it, my father repeated. He laughed, a thin sound. Della, of course you got it. Maybe you don't remember. Maybe. I'd remember $144,000, I said. My stepmother put her hand on his arm. Ray, just his name but with a whole sentence underneath it. Shut up. And here's where most people would have started screaming. I've watched plenty of folks scream at narcissists. I've watched them in waiting rooms, in parking lots, in the back of ambulances. Screaming is fuel. You scream at people like my parents, and you hand them the story they've been telling themselves your whole life, that you're hysterical, you're unstable, you're the problem. The only way to take a liar apart is to make them keep talking until they hang themselves with their own words. So I reached into my bag. My hand was perfectly steady. I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and propped it against the floral centerpiece, lens pointed down the table, framing my father's sweating forehead and my stepmother's beautiful, furious, frightened face. Ohio's a one-party consent state. As long as I'm in the conversation, I can record it. I can broadcast it. I can send every word out into the world. And I intended to. What are you doing? My stepmother asked very quietly. Recording my grandmother's birthday, I said. It's a special occasion. The little number in the corner of my screen ticked up. 8 viewers. 19, 40. My father chose confidence. It's what men like my father always choose, right up until the moment it kills them. He leaned back, spread his hands like he was about to explain something to a slow child. Okay. Look, we didn't take anything. We managed it, that's all. You were a kid. You were grieving. You were terrible with money. I was 19, I said. I'm 28 now. I've been an adult for a while. And we invested it. For you. For the family. You think a Rolex is theft? It's an appearance. People judge a family, Della. Your stepmother walks into a room looking like that. Doors open. Those doors open for all of us. That's an investment in the whole family standing. And the bourbon? I asked. He was holding a glass of it. He'd been holding it all night, a deep amber pour from a bottle he'd made a whole show of, telling the waiter to leave it on the table. I know bourbon because half the guys I went to nursing school with were obsessed with it, and I learned to recognize the labels. That was a 20-year pappy, $3,000 a bottle if you could even find it. That's networking, he said, and actually had the nerve to take a sip. This dinner is networking. It's Grandma's birthday. Everything's networking, sweetheart. 100 viewers now. The comments had started, scrolling up the side of my screen too fast to read, a river of strangers. My half-sister finally surfaced. She set her phone down. That's how I knew it was serious. She'd actually put the phone down and rolled her eyes at me with the practiced contempt of someone who has never once in her life been told no. Oh my God, you're doing this now? At Grandma's birthday? You always have to make everything about you. She flipped her hair. Mom and Dad gave up everything for this family. So what if they used a little of Grandma's money? You're fine. You have a job. I have 3 jobs, I said. I work full-time in the ER, I pick up agency shifts on my days off, and I do telehealth triage calls until midnight. I live in a one-bedroom with black mold in the bathroom ceiling that the landlord won't fix because the building's getting torn down anyway. That's a choice, she said. You chose to be a nurse. Nobody made you do the whole tragic poverty thing. I chose to keep people alive, I said, including, occasionally, myself, which has gotten expensive. She didn't have an answer for that, so she picked her phone back up. My father, watching me not scream, got bolder. That's the thing about people like him. Calm reads as weakness to them. They mistake your control for permission. You have to understand the position we were in, he said, swirling his stolen bourbon. We had 2 daughters. One of them, and I love you, Della, I do. One of them was always going to be okay. Steady, practical. You were going to figure it out no matter what. You're the responsible one, and the responsible one doesn't need help because she's responsible. Say her name, I said. What? You said you had 2 daughters and one was always going to be okay. So who got the money? Say her name. The room got quiet. Even my half-sister looked up. And here's the moment the whole thing turned. The moment I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. Because my stepmother, who had been gripping my father's arm, who had been trying to keep the lid on this whole thing, took her hand back. She sat up. She smoothed the front of her dress, and she set down the mask she'd worn at every holiday for the better part of a decade, set it down right there on the table next to the breadbasket, and looked at me with the flat, bored eyes of someone closing a ledger. Fine, she said. You want to do this in front of everyone? Let's do it. We didn't take the money because we're greedy, Della. We took it because you were a bad investment. The whole table stopped. My grandmother's smile was gone. My father had gone very still. Excuse me, I said. Look at you. She gestured at me, at my outfit. A thrifted blazer I'd tailored myself because I couldn't afford the kind of clothes the rest of them wore. You're a nurse. You're solid. Reliable. You'll always have a job, and you'll never have a name. You're never going to be on a magazine. You're never going to walk a red carpet. You're a savings account. You're safe. She turned, and her whole face changed, softened, lit up. The way it never once lit up for me. But your sister is a star. She has presence. She has a following. She's building something. My half-sister wants to be famous. That's the whole of it. She has 140,000 followers and a ring light and a dream, and she has never held a job longer than a season. Building a brand takes capital, my stepmother went on, and I swear she sounded like she was reading from a pitch deck. It takes clothes. It takes travel. It takes the right rooms and the right cars and the right look. That money was sitting in an account doing nothing while your sister needed it to launch. We moved it where it would actually grow. I looked at her, and I understood something I had spent 28 years not letting myself understand. I wasn't sitting across from a parent. I was sitting across from a portfolio manager who had looked at 2 children and decided which one to liquidate. This is the math they do. To people like them, a child isn't a person with a body that gets sick and a heart that gets tired. A child is an asset. I was the low-yield bond. Boring, dependable, invisible. My sister was the volatile growth stock. Flashy, risky, exciting, and in their accounting, stealing the medication out of my hands to buy my sister a handbag wasn't cruelty. It was reallocation. It was just good portfolio management. You did the math, I said quietly. Everyone does the math, she said. Most people just won't admit it. The viewer count hit 400. Then it hit 1,000 and just kept climbing. And I knew it was climbing because somewhere out in the dark, people were screen recording, people were sending it to their group chats, people were watching a woman in a steakhouse confess to monetizing her stepdaughter's illness and feeling completely, serenely justified. That wine your husband's drinking, I said, nodding at the bourbon. Do you know what I was doing the month he bought a bottle like that? I'm sure you'll tell me. I was in a hospital bed. My kidneys were shutting down because I'd been cutting my medication in half to stretch it. I called my father from that bed and asked him for $400. I turned to my father. Do you remember what you said to me? He didn't answer. You said money was tight. You said I needed to budget. I let that sit there. I watched it land on the faces of 1,000 strangers I couldn't see. So when I look at that bottle, I said, I don't see networking. I see my kidneys. That's what you're drinking. That's a year of my infusions swirling around in a glass, and you're worried about the notes of oak. My father set the glass down. His hand was shaking. Della, he said, we can fix this. We can write you a check. Tonight. Whatever you think you're owed. What I'm owed, I repeated. We'll make it right. And I smiled at him. I'd never smiled at him like that before. I felt it on my own face, and I didn't recognize it. You can't make it right, I said, but you can explain it to the police. I'd expected panic. The word police usually buys you panic. But my stepmother just laughed. A short, bright, incredulous sound. The laugh of someone watching an amateur overplay a hand. Police, she said. Oh, honey, grow up. Nobody goes to prison for managing a family trust. There's no crime here. There's a grieving girl who's bad with money and a family who looked out for her. You want to call the police? Call them. They'll take one look and tell you to talk to a family therapist. And for one cold second, I believed her. Because she said it the way she said everything, like she'd already checked, like the lawyers had already weighed in, like the outcome was decided, and I was the only one in the room too naive to know it. That's when my grandmother spoke. She hadn't said a word since I told her the truth. She'd sat at the head of the table, her birthday dinner curdling in front of her, and she'd listened to her son-in-law and his wife explain, in their own words, exactly what they'd done to her dead daughter's only child. And now she folded her napkin, set it beside her plate, and looked at my stepmother with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the look of a person who has already won and is deciding how much it would amuse her to let you keep talking. Sharon, she said. It was the first time all night anyone had used my stepmother's name. Do you know what a forensic accountant does? My stepmother's smile flickered. I'm sure you're about to tell me. They find money, my grandmother said. Money that's been hidden. Money that's been moved around and dressed up and run through accounts to make it look like it went somewhere it didn't. She reached down beside her chair to a leather satchel I hadn't noticed, the old soft kind with a brass clasp, and she set a worn folder on the white tablecloth. She didn't slam it. She placed it down the way you place something heavy and final, the way you set down a verdict. I hired one in January, she said, right after Thanksgiving. After my granddaughter told me, by accident, that she was $110,000 in debt, she looked at me, and her eyes were wet, and her voice did not shake at all. Because I'd been sending her $3,000 a month for 4 years, and a girl who gets that money is not $110,000 in debt. So I checked. For the first time in my life, I checked my own son-in-law's work. My father had gone gray, properly gray, the color I'd seen on patients right before things went very wrong. Mom, he started. Gloria, let's. The first of every month, my grandmother said, opening the folder, $3,000 left my trust. She slid a sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a flow chart, clean and brutal, boxes and arrows. And 24 hours later, every single month for 48 months, that exact sum left Della's account and went here. Her finger landed on a box near the top, an LLC, Sterling Crest Holdings. My stepmother's face didn't move, but something behind it did. It sounds important, doesn't it? My grandmother said. Sterling Crest Holdings. Very corporate. It's a shell company. Registered in Delaware, and the registered agent. She looked up. Is you, Sharon. That's our family investment vehicle, my stepmother said, and for the first time, the smoothness in her voice had a crack in it. Then let's look at what your family investment vehicle invested in, my grandmother said, and pulled out another page. March, 2 years ago, a leased Range Rover. The following summer, a week in Tulum, 4 first-class tickets. A kitchen renovation. Those would be the quartz countertops, I imagine, the ones Della saw in a photo from her hospital bed. She turned the page over. And then there's the big one. She tapped a line near the bottom. 26 months of mortgage payments, she said, on a lakefront condo at Buckeye Lake. My father made a sound. My half-sister, who had been silent for a while, said, Wait, The lake place is mine. I have my whole influencer retreat planned there next month. Be quiet, my stepmother told her, the first honest thing I'd ever heard her say to her daughter. You think you can just sell it and pay her back, my grandmother said, reading my father like I'd been reading him all night. I can see you doing the math. We'll liquidate the condo, we'll cut her a check, we'll make this a civil matter, a misunderstanding between family. She closed the folder. You can't sell it, Ray. It's in the LLC's name, my father said, grabbing at it. We own it. We can. Have you ever heard, my grandmother said, of a constructive trust? Blank faces all around the table. It's a beautiful piece of law, she said, and now she was almost smiling. When someone steals money and uses it to buy property, the courts don't care whose name is on the deed. The law looks at where the money came from, and it gives the property back to the person it was stolen from. Every dollar of that down payment came out of Della's trust. Every mortgage payment, traced dollar for dollar. She slid one more document across the table. While the three of you were getting dressed for my birthday dinner, my attorney was in front of a judge. The emergency order was signed at 4 o'clock this afternoon. She looked at me. The condo is yours, sweetheart. As of this afternoon, it's done. I picked up the keys that my grandmother slid across the table. Actual keys. She'd had them couriered to her. She'd thought of everything, and I held them in my hand and felt their weight and could not speak. My father stood up. Call the police, he said loud, to no one, to all of us. Fine, call them. We'll see who they believe, a family of 4 or some hysterical. They're already here, my grandmother said. 2 officers came in through the door behind him. I found out later that my grandmother's attorney had called ahead, had given them the paperwork, had walked them through it. They didn't come in fast. They came in the way they come in when the case is already made, when all that's left is the part where people learn what they've done. And my father, cornered, sweating, watching his life come apart on a tablecloth, did the thing that ended any sliver of mercy I might have had left. He turned to me and tried to throw a grenade into the room. You want to play this game, he said, low and ugly. Fine, there are 3 credit cards in your name, Della. I opened them, years ago. There's debt on them, lots of it, and unless you sign that condo back to this family right now, I will let every one of them default. I'll torch your credit. You'll never rent an apartment, never get a loan, never. He stopped, because I had picked up my phone and turned it around so he could see the screen. Smile, I said. There are 41,000 people watching you confess to identity theft and extortion. In real time, some of them are probably lawyers. A few of them are definitely cops. I watched it hit him. I watched the man who had drunk my kidneys realize that he had just committed 2 felonies on a live stream, in front of a witness, in a one-party consent state, while 2 police officers stood 10 feet behind him. They cuffed my father first. He didn't go quietly, but he went. My stepmother went without a sound. She'd already done the math, I think. The way she did the math on everything, and she'd worked out that there was nothing left to save. The Rolex flashed once under the chandelier as they led her out, $11,000 of appearances, and then it was gone. My half-sister slid down out of her chair and sat on the floor of the private dining room and watched her account. Her followers, her whole borrowed life burned down in the comments of a stream she hadn't even known was happening. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I just felt tired. She was 23 and they'd built her on a foundation of stolen medicine and she had no idea how to stand on her own because they'd never let her learn. That's its own kind of theft. It was almost midnight by the time my grandmother and I left. She had her arm through mine. On the sidewalk outside the steakhouse, she stopped and turned me to face her and held both my hands, and her eyes were doing the thing they hadn't done all night, finally, the tears coming loose. I should have checked, she said. I should have checked years ago. I left you with them because I trusted him, because your mother trusted him, and I went to take care of your grandfather and I didn't look. I'm so sorry, Della. I am so sorry. Della, I am so sorry. You looked the second you had a reason to, I told her, and then you came after them like a hurricane. Grandma, you got me a condo at a steakhouse on a Tuesday. I'm not sure you have anything to apologize for. She laughed, wet and surprised, and pulled me into a hug, and for a minute we just stood there on the cold sidewalk, the two women in our family who were still standing. I drove out to the lake the next morning to the condo that was somehow mine. The first thing I did, and I want to say this for everyone who's been worried, for everyone in the comments who's going to tell me to be safe, the first thing I did was call a locksmith and change every lock. And the second thing I did was have a security system installed, cameras and all. Because people who will steal your kidneys to buy a handbag are not people who respect a court order. You protect yourself. You assume they will come back, and you make sure that when they do, the door does not open. Then I stood on the balcony. It was January, and the lake was the color of pewter, and the wind off it was the kind that gets into your bones. And I stood there in a coat I'd bought at a thrift store and breathed it in. The cold, clean air. And for the first time in years, I wasn't doing math in my head. I wasn't counting doses or shifts or the days until a check cleared. I was just standing in a place that was mine, breathing. People love to say family is forever. They put it on signs and pillows in the walls of their kitchens. And I believed it for 28 years, believed that blood meant you owed something, that you stayed, that you forgave, that you let them keep cutting because they were family. But I'm a nurse. I know what you do when something in the body has turned against the body, when it stopped being a part of you and started feeding on you. You don't keep it because it's yours. You don't negotiate with it. You take it out before it kills you, and then you heal. That dinner was the surgery. It hurt more than anything I've ever survived. And I survived it. For a long time I believed that staying quiet was the same thing as being good. I thought if I never made a scene, never asked for too much, never embarrassed anyone at the dinner table, that made me the decent one. It took standing in that steakhouse, watching Sharon explain in her own calm voice why my medicine was worth less than my sister's handbag, to understand that being silent had never protected me. It had only protected them. Real decency isn't swallowing the truth to keep the peace. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is set your phone on the table and let people hear exactly who they've chosen to be. I think about the math a lot now. Ray and Sharon did their math, and they were sure it added up. The responsible daughter would absorb the loss, the flashy one would shine, and nobody would ever check the receipts. What they never counted on was that I'd learned to read people for a living, and that my grandmother, the moment she had one real reason to look, would look at everything. That's the part I want anyone listening to hold on to. They didn't get caught because the universe punished them. They got caught because someone finally paid attention, traced the money dollar by dollar, and understood the law well enough to use it. Cleverness isn't being the loudest person in the room. It's being the one who keeps her head when everyone expects her to lose it, who watches and counts and waits for the moment the lie completes itself. And I won't pretend the waiting was easy. There were years I cut my own pills in half and called it discipline. There were nights I worked a third shift with a body that was actively turning against me, because quitting felt like proving them right. I don't recommend that life, but I won't lie about what it built either. The same stubbornness that kept me alive on a bathroom floor is the stubbornness that kept me steady at that table while a woman told 1,000 strangers I was a bad investment. You can be worn down to almost nothing and still refuse to break in the one moment. Breaking would cost you everything. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Pay attention to the people who only do math when they think no one's checking. Build the kind of mind that traces things back to where they started. And when you finally get your moment, when the truth is sitting right there in front of everyone, don't waste it being polite. Gloria got me a home at a birthday dinner because she stopped trusting and started verifying. I got my life back because I stopped apologizing for needing one. Family is supposed to be the thing that holds you up. When it becomes the thing eating you alive, you are allowed to cut it out and call that love, the kind you finally, at long last, give to yourself.